We should probably talk about KT versus GenG, considering that was a more disappointing series than we
that might be
we
one
might
of the
have
craziest
anticipated.
betting angles we've ever found, because like I said, that wasn't even just, hey guys, look, like the underdog in a close match has like got weird big odds. To me, they were the favorite, man. I bet that like it was a favorite. I just got to bet with like 2.x odds. Like, I can't even believe that angle was there. That just shows you how being undefeated like GenG was, just it becomes a crazy like mind demon in people's minds. They couldn't somehow this is what I can't get, Monty. They watched GenG play those last few weeks and couldn't conceive they could ever lose. Like, not only could they, but KT was exactly the team that was going to do it. I agree, though. It definitely wasn't the banger it should have been. It should have been a way better series than that.
I mean, especially because KT was literally on an 11 match win streak themselves, right? They were virtually undefeated. The game they lost was their second match of the season against GenG. And as we've said many times, that was the game where the static shiv punishment occurred. KT blew GenG out of the water in the first game of that series. And then there was the scandal of, Aiming bought the static shiv, so he has to go back to base and sell it. They lose that game. They lose the third game, look super tilted. Also, entirely different meta. I mean, it's 2 patches back. So we've seen a lot of shifts since then, but yeah, I think KT, it was crazy. We did a parlay on esports bet with their D+ series. All in all, we made like 1,000 USDT last week just on KT winning. So they really, I think, delivered in terms of their performance so far. And as I've said repeatedly, this isn't getting excited for KT, guys. This iteration of KT has been very good since kind of the latter half of the spring split. Remember that they should have beaten T1 in the upper brackets of the playoffs.
Doing it that close.
Yeah. I mean, they had a huge advantage in game number 5 that they definitely should have been able to close. And now we're seeing a meta that continuously seems to be extremely good for KT overall. They know what all the power picks are. I think they are leading the meta game as far as Korea goes. And, they're getting compositions that I don't think, many teams in the LPL would be willing to give over. I think KT is much more similar to an LPL team when it comes to draft priority. And what's interesting is we're seeing them even debut new champions. BDD had his first Jace game ever in the history of career, which is very strange when you think this guy is like kind of like a poke specialist in many ways for his career. Like, how do you go through being one of, if not the most famous Zoe player in the world and never have played a fucking game of Jace? That is so strange. But he played a great Jace game, right? He looked incredibly comfortable on this champion. And you see why it is one of the highest win percentages in professional play across major regions.
I mean, same thing with everyone who's a monster just smashes on that mid lane Jace when they get it. They're unbelievable.
Yeah, and it really is a extremely strong champion right now. And just like Aiming realized before everybody else in the LCK that you should just fucking first pick Kai'Sa whenever you can. And people might say, well, is that, are they just riding the really OP champions? And the answer is no, because we've seen now what happens when these players get targeted and the depth of their champion pools. The problem is it's just impossible to ban out KT right now because they are going to get some crazy strong picks no matter what you do. And they are so good at taking powerful meta champion selections and then just snowballing them into brutal wins. So this is just a fucking good team right now. And Keen is continues to perform like he should be the MVP of this league. GenG, I think, underperformed on the day. Like, I don't think this version of GenG is the same one that's going to show up in playoffs. And I think once these teams inevitably hit each other again at some point in LCK in their playoffs, this will be a much closer game. But right now, it does seem like KT is kind of definitively the best team in Korea.
Plus, the hype thing for me is if they make it to the final, well, a bunch of these players aren't super experienced winners who won LCK titles, etc. Like, there's also that factor. It's like, even though KT is the best team now, I'm going to be interested to see who holds their nerve in that final, mate. I mean, if you look at it right now, GenG can lose, KT can lose. It could be a pretty exciting one. You have double limb component as well. You might get to see it twice. You might get to see that match twice.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think What's your take on GenG these days? Because there was so much hype around Doran because he had better performances against bad teams. But then now we see the KT game, and it's kind of an underwhelming performance by him, especially to the dominance of Keen. Peanut, who certainly was in the MVP conversation, didn't really have the same early game impact as he's had against some of the worst teams in the league throughout GenG's run. And a lot of it was kind of just down to Pays being able to carry with the leads that he had, and he couldn't put in the superstar carry performance, particularly in game number 2. Like, he had advantages and he had to be the one who carried this team. Instead, we saw him getting picked off before fights even started, and more or less kind of throwing the advantage that he had away through bad macro. So it really felt bad watching GenG here. And I think they're in a similar position to top esports, where it's awesome that you have all of these players. And when Doran is good, he can be very good. But what is he good enough and consistent enough to actually do damage against some of the top teams in the world? And I think the answer is just no.
The problem with GenG is, like, I always thought, even in the spring, like, it's stylistically what was impressive about them as a team. And they're not the, like, all-star roster like JDG is. Like, if you look at their team, like you say, Doran's just like, in reality, in a perfect world, Doran would just be on, like, the 5th best team in the LCK. He's not a bad player, but there's nowhere near, like, some monster top laner. So you already don't really have the win condition out of top lane. Peanut himself he just has issues in game 5s. We've all seen it. And he just has times where he just decides he can't play certain meta champions, even though I think his skill set's totally there. You see some carry games he looks good on still. But he's just decided he's that sort of jungler now. Chovey's mega still. No problems there. Pays is good. He's just not ruler. He's not some, like, absolute... He's not even Jackie Love, mate. He's just a very good AD carry. So I think the issue with their team is just, like, they're one of the most... Unlike teams like Damwon, they can't just pop off individually and win the game. Like, they actually need to, as a team, be all on the same page, everything nailed down. And bunch of their players aren't that experienced. Like, Pace is still a rookie, essentially. Like, I don't blame him. I think he's performing fine. Just the problem is, LCK is a bit weak at the moment, so they are just a clear-cut top 2 team right now. There's no contenders. It's them and KT. So I think they're just essentially, it's kind of unfair. Like, I would think if they were like the 4th best team or the 3rd best team, no one would have any complaints about GenG. They'd just be really good. Look how they re-upped and brought people in and repositioned them. But if you want them to be like, remember, they were number 1 in the LCK for most of this split. If you want them to be number 1 team in the world, they're not going to bear up very well on that. Like, they can't compare to JDG.
Right. And I think the problem with LCK in general is that after Ruler leaves this team, and I don't want to take anything away from Pays because he is a phenomenal rookie talent, but he's still a rookie talent. And nobody expected this team to come back and win spring. Think about where we were. It was T1 running back their roster again. They were incredibly dominant in spring. We saw some really big roster moves like Deft to D+, right? Which we all thought is, oh man, this is now an even more stacked roster. Could this team actually be back in the mix for a title right now? Now, I will say there was less hype around KT as opposed to last year, just because BDD and Keen were coming from some really bad individual performances last year. So the ceiling of KT we knew was going to be very high, but we didn't know if Keen and BDD were basically washed forever or whether they were going to be, kind of redeemable. They did get Lehens over there, right? So GenG replacing their entire bot lane was also potentially going to be an issue for them. But my point is, like, if you look at this in retrospect, it's like you say, like, GenG is definitely a playoff team in the LCK, but is this objectively a downgrade from their roster that smashed Summer last year? Yes, it is. And so they've overperformed expectations, and big credit to that to Delight and Pays, who have both been, really quite good. But they haven't been able to get, like, if this team is the one that's running things right now, it just goes to show how much of a disaster, T1 has become, and the underwhelming nature of D+ Kia, as well as just kind of roster construction in general in the LCS. Like, Hanwha has a lot of money and they got Viper, but my God, why were you buying Zeka and Kingen at top dollar? Like, this could be a much better team with the amount of money that they're spending. You didn't need to get Zeka and Kingen. That was a horrible GMing mistake.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.